All right, so good evening. Thank you so much for joining us at our first webinar of the fall series. Today, we're going to cover kind of all of the stuff that it takes to start a new school year. So some updates of inclusive higher education in Colorado, as well as how to start preparing. No matter how old your student is, it's never too early, it's never too late. So with that, just wanted to, again, give you the link to the rest of our webinar series. You'll receive this PDF slideshow tomorrow. You can click that and then register for all other webinars. There is Q&A time allotted throughout, but it's never a bad time to ask. So feel free to use the chat, unmute and interrupt me, whatever you need. Happy to be a resource. And then just know that as you log out of the webinar today, you'll get a little pop-up on your screen that asks you to take a brief little survey. It's pretty short. Would love some feedback. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the recording as well as all resources will be sent out tomorrow. So let's get rolling. All right, so briefly, just sort of want to introduce in what we do and who we are. So we are a nonprofit that works to create opportunities for students with intellectual disability, specifically to foster their academic growth, their social development, their career advancement, as well as their independence. We, as a nonprofit, do not provide the actual services on campus. So I like to just sort of make that clear. There are excellent staff members who do provide those services. It's just not us. And so you'll kind of see who those people are throughout. But this is us. This is the in team. We love chatting with parents, students, teachers, kind of whoever. So there is all of our contact information. My name is Elise Kramer for a more formal introduction. I am our program coordinator, and I'll be kind of walking us through these main elements today. So we are going to first talk about all of the college options for students with disabilities in Colorado. There are a few kind of pillars. Then we're going to hone in on college prep skills, specifically for students with intellectual disability, and then kind of talk about a plan of implementation, because there can be a lot of skills. It can get really overwhelming. So hopefully we'll try to break it down and set some more manageable goals. And then just fair warning, we have a lot of information to get through and only an hour to do it. So that fourth section, the resources to support preparation, it's just a lot of links, handouts, downloads, things like that. I fully expect that we're not going to get there, but you're welcome to explore those on your own time and reach out with any questions you have. So this used to be an hour and a half webinar. It's now only an hour, but that's okay. That stuff you can fully handle by yourself. So just quickly to go over our objectives today, I hope you walk away with a better understanding of all the options for students with disabilities who want to go to college. We're going to chat about the 4 pillars of inclusive higher ed, which I briefly just touched on already, but we're going to sort of hone into those more specifically, as well as prep techniques and goals for each of those pillars. And then again, you can look at the resources and develop a plan of action that fits your family or your classroom, however works for you. So with that, let's jump right in. So I want to begin by discussing kind of the history of disability services in colleges in the United States. This is a long timeline. I'm not going to cover all of it. Really, where I want to draw your attention is in 2008. This is when the federal government said, you know, there is a large swath of students across the United States who don't necessarily qualify for traditional college entry criteria, but would really benefit from college. And so in 2008, a federal law was passed that said that schools can, they don't have to, but they can, offer modifications at the college level. At the same time, Think College, which is a national sort of resource hub, was established to kind of be the guiding light in this. And I'll talk a lot about Think College and provide a lot of their resources throughout. So just kind of know that in the back of your head, who that is. They're another great resource for you. And then in 2016, Colorado was the last of 3 states. We did not offer inclusive higher ed, and 47 states did. And so our state government kind of looked at that and said, yeah, we need to, you know, fill this major gap that we have here in our state. So a bill was passed to provide funding for 3 pilot schools. I'll talk about what those are here in a few slides. And then in 2022, more funding was passed. And in addition to that funding, a private school was able to get private funding for their program. So by 2025, we'll have 5 more programs launched, bringing us to a total of 8, which is really exciting. So with that, I'm going to briefly go through the three kind of types of disability services. It's really overwhelming. There are a lot of nuances. We did an entire hour-long presentation on this one slide last spring. So if you want that resource, I'll give it to you in an email tomorrow. Right now, this is just going to sort of be the brief nuts and bolts. So traditional disability services, this is for students who meet college entry criteria, who want an associate's degree, and meet and potentially exceed all class outcomes, but they need accommodations to be successful. So I will be using the terms accommodations and notifications quite a bit throughout this next hour. So I briefly wanted to sort of touch on what the differences are. So you have here some examples of accommodations. Accommodations are for students who can do the assignment, but they maybe just need a little bit extra support to make that happen. So they need extra time on a test, or they need a quiet location or something like that, right? So you have lots and lots of examples of accommodations here. The difference between that and a modification would be the entire learning outcome is going to be a little bit different. So maybe a 5-page paper is assigned, but for a student who needs a modification, they only are going to do a 1-page paper or a slideshow, or maybe they're going to work really hard at a paragraph. So that's kind of the difference between accommodations and modifications. A modification changes the what is the learning outcome, as where an accommodation changes the how. So traditional disability services only provide accommodations that is legally required to be provided at all colleges and universities in the United States. And so any student with any disability, potentially a student with a 504 IEP, could fall into that category. Then we have a next category that we like to call supplemental disability services. This is still for students who meet traditional entry criteria. They can still take an ACT and SAT and get a decent score. They maybe have a pretty good GPA, right? In terms of getting into college, they may not have the most trouble with the admissions process. But once they're there, they do need a little bit more support than the traditional accommodations. And so potentially they need coaching with executive functioning, that kind of stuff. These are sometimes offered on college campuses through the Disability Services office, but often these are also provided by private coaches or private companies or organizations that will come in and help students with those additional kinds of tasks related to success in college. Where we at IN come in are here in this yellow box with inclusive higher education services. So this is for students who don't meet traditional college entry criteria. Perhaps they don't have a traditional diploma. They may go to high school with EEOs or extended evidence outcomes. They very likely don't take ACTs or SATs. They may not have a traditional GPA, that kind of stuff. So this is for students who don't meet college entry criteria traditionally and have an intellectual disability and or a need for modifications to be successful at the college level. A note on this is that because these courses, or students, what I should say is students who take these courses, receive modifications, their transcript will show, sometimes it's an asterisk or sometimes there's an M next to it. They kind of notate it differently at different universities. But the transcript will show which courses were modified. And courses that are modified legally cannot go towards a traditional degree. So students will walk out with what's called a higher education certificate. It's still really weighty. It's very meaningful. It is still, stamped and signed from the office of the registrar at the university. It's not like it was written in crayon on your grandma's kitchen table, I like to say. It means a lot. But if you have a student who can receive a degree, we do sort of suggest at least start in one of these other two categories and see if they can find success there, just for that reason. So again, these are students who need both accommodations and modifications, and they need pretty intensive either staff and or peer mentor support in the four main categories of academic participation, social engagement, vocational development, and independence. And I'm going to continue talking about these four main pillars all throughout this webinar. So I'm going to kind of skip those descriptions. They are pretty, self-descriptive, but I will get into more depth in a few slides here. So just kind of know, not all schools have to offer modifications. Only some do. I'll talk about what schools those are in Colorado, but no, if you go to thinkcollege.net, they have an extensive list of all more than 300 schools across the nation that offer these kinds of services. And so you can find that list again at thinkcollege.net. And then also just be aware that the application process is a little bit backwards. So for a student who needs a traditional form of disability services, they would first apply to the university, and then once they're admitted, they'd get linked up with the Disability Services Office. For students in inclusive higher ed, or you'll hear me say IHE, same thing. For students in IHE, they will apply through the inclusive office, and then from there, they will be admitted into the university. So just kind of know the whole process is different. Most places, they don't even go through the admissions office at all. If they do, the admissions person is more there as a support. They're typically not the person making the admissions decisions, even if they are kind of linked up. And then they do have additional fees just so that we can pay our peer mentors and all kinds of things to go to classes and apartments and all that, fun kinds of supports that students may need. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We are having a whole financial webinar also in October. So all those kinds of fees will be covered in more depth in a few months. All right. So before we get too far, I want to message in the chat, one moment. Provide main contact information for each of the offices. Yes, I will do that. I will send that in my follow-up email. Great question. Okay, so before we get too far, I want to just sort of outline some of the basic differences between high school and college, just to kind of set you up and sort of this mental shift for how to set up your students for success as they eventually make this transition as well. So in high school, the law that governs PK 21 education is the IDEA. And this is a law that intends for students to be successful when they are pursuing their different academic needs and goals. In college, the law that governs students with disabilities is the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. These only guarantee students access. In college, the onus for success is on students. Students need to be the ones who are navigating the resources, and it's our job as the adults around them to empower them to be able to do so. And that's part of what I'll kind of talk about throughout the rest of this webinar is how can we continue empowering students in a wide variety of ways so that they can be successful. In high school, as well as, elementary, middle school, the process of modifications and accommodations to students can seem pretty automatic. So I used to be a general education teacher, and before the school year even started, I would receive an email of here's all the students in my class, and here are all the accommodations and modifications I needed to apply on their behalf. So students may not even have known that that happened, but from the moment they stepped into my classroom, I was in charge of making sure that their accommodations and modifications were in place. That's not the case in college. In college, it's very interactive. If a student does not go to their professor or instructor and hand them a letter of accommodation or modification, which they will be in charge of helping to create, they're not doing it themselves, it's through an office, but they will have to, be part of that process. If they don't bring that letter to the professor or instructor, they don't receive accommodations or modifications. It is very interactive. It does require a lot more self-advocacy. In high school, there's lots of structure. You have bells telling you when it's time to leave. You have teachers, writing on the whiteboard that your homework is due on Tuesday, that kind of thing. In college, there's a lot less structure. There's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more downtime. And the onus, again, is on the students to kind of figure out, are they going to write down what their homework is? Are they going to figure out in their downtime, are they going to scroll TikTok for 3 hours, or are they going to maybe write the paper that's due tomorrow? In high school, there's a lot less student choice. You're kind of told, and second period is math. College, there's a lot more student choice. You get to choose your whole schedule. You get to choose what you're studying, what kind of clubs you want to join. So almost everything in college is kind of focused around student choice. In high school, the parents or guardians or caregivers are the primary advocates. In college, nothing happens, no conversation happens, no decision happens that affects a student without the student. Every single email that is sent that involves the student will be CC'd on that email, for example, right? So students are kind of the primary drivers of their destiny in a way when they're in college, which can feel really different than when they're in high school. Just a few more. In high school, parents or typically it's a special education teacher, but in some places parents have kind of taken that on as well, can be more of the primary case managers that are coordinating services, right? So typically it's the teacher in the classroom who's coordinating services with an OT or a PT or things like that. But then you also have a parent coordinating outside of school services that may affect what happens in the school as well. As we're in college, it's on students to say, you know what, I need help with math, so I'm going to find a math tutor and I'm going to go to the tutoring center to make that happen. Or I'm going to go to the library and see if someone is there who can help me do research for, this topic I have for my history class. And so rather than someone else coordinating services and telling the student where and when to be, it's on the student to kind of make sure that that happens. And kind of along with that is, growing up, there's your family's involved and they provide a lot of guidance, and that doesn't necessarily go away when students go to college, but it is on students to sort of suffer or benefit from the consequences of their own decisions. So we had a student last semester who decided that she just didn't want to go to her 8 a.m. class. So she stopped setting her alarm, slept right through it. And guess what? She failed that class, right? That was a natural consequence of that decision. Now supports are put in place to make sure that she was making different decisions, right? It doesn't just, happen. But there is a little bit more kind of weightiness to the consequences of students' decisions. And so that's something that we really try to prepare students for, but also their families for, that sometimes it's okay to kind of let go and let your student just sort of, see what happens in a sense. I talked a lot about services that students will have to, the onus is on them to see those services. This is just a, small list. There are a lot of services on a lot of college campuses. But if you're kind of wondering what I'm talking about, this is just a smattering. I'm going to kind of skip this because we don't have a lot of time to cover a lot of content, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions if they come up. All right, so now for the more nitty-gritty, what is inclusive higher education? So as I mentioned, there is an alternative admissions pathway. Students will apply directly through the inclusive office. Again, I already mentioned they don't necessarily need a traditional diploma. They can have just a certificate of completion. A lot of students have EEOs, test scores are not required, that kinds of stuff. So it truly is an alternative admissions pathway through an alternative office. Once students are admitted, their college life is fully inclusive and fully normative. When I say the word normative, I mean, what is every other student on that campus doing? Every other student is going to class. Every other student is joining clubs. Every other student is eating in the dining hall, right? All of that is very, very inclusive when students get to college. So we have sometimes parents or teachers kind of assume that inclusive higher education is sort of a special education class that happens to occur on a college campus, and that's not what it is. Students are in the exact same classes with the exact same professors learning alongside their general education peers when they are in college, which is why you'll hear me talk a lot about starting that process early and getting students included into general education classes in elementary, middle, high school, kind of as early as possible so that they're used to that. Students get to take courses that fully align with their career goals. So this is kind of my favorite part of inclusive higher ed that I think is really kind of special. Students can say, I want my dream job to be X, right? And all the courses they take will get them to that career path. So for example, we just had a student in May graduate with her certificate in event planning. Well, her university does not have a major in event planning, right? But that's just what she wants to do. And so they were able to find all these courses to kind of make that happen. She took basic math courses so that she could learn kind of the finances to help, right? Yeah, events have money. She took marketing classes, photography classes, right? So she could kind of learn all the different aspects that make an event successful, but she got to piecemeal her own her own course load, which I think is really, really cool. They also take courses that align with daily life skills. So they'll typically have 2 academic courses. Those are the inclusive normative courses. And then they'll have 1 course that is just for the students in that inclusive office where they do learn things like executive functioning skills. They may focus on relationship management, all kinds of things that are more specific to the population of students with ID. And that is where they get a lot of their extra support. Sometimes they have extra homework time in those classes. Sometimes they meet with peer mentors. It kind of varies. And those classes do change every semester. Again, students get to access both accommodations and modifications. That's that key difference between inclusive higher ed and other disability services. Because of that, they earn that certificate credential. And then all along the way, they're participating in career readiness. So they have a really cool trajectory where they may start out maybe working at the dining hall. And that's just where they're working on punctuality and what do you do when a customer or client is not the happiest with you, right? And so they're learning more basic career skills. We call those soft skills, skills that will apply no matter what career they wind up in. And then they kind of slowly graduate through internships or volunteer roles in their field of choice. And then ideally, by the end of college, they have had job experience in their dream career where they can decide, yes, this is the job for me, or no, this isn't. And then all along the way, they're also getting training in interview skills, how to write a resume and cover letter and all that kind of, fancy but boring stuff that not all of us learn. These students get really direct training in that, which is really cool. They can experience independent living. No college requires it. Some colleges don't even offer it, and I'll touch on that in a few slides too. But for a lot of students who do experience independent living, they get additional kind of just life skills, everyday training, and like, how do you do laundry? And hey, when was the last time you showered? And all the fun stuff that, the adulting skills, if you will. And then lastly, they get really intensive support in these 4 main domains, which I have talked a lot about, and I will continue touching on them throughout this webinar. So again, I'm not going to talk about them in super detail because I'm about to. But again, just to sort of remind you, the 4 main pillars of inclusive higher education are academics, social development, career development, and then independence. So with that, let's go through what are the options in Colorado. So we're really excited to announce that UCCS, the Office of Inclusive Services, is the 2nd inclusive higher education option in the nation to earn an accreditation from the Inclusive Higher Education Accreditation Consortium, committee, which is a really, really long term. Basically, what this means is that when this new accrediting body came out, UCCS said, we're willing to pilot the program because we are so confident in the quality of the services we offer that we're going to go through the pilot program. And they earn their accreditation, which is really cool. We expect all schools in Colorado to go through this process in the next few years once that accrediting body moves out of their pilot phase, which I think is 1 or 2 more years. So ideally, they will all get there, but we're super excited to sort of announce that UCCS is only the 2nd in the nation to have that. These students go through a 4-year program, and they do live on campus in very, very fancy apartments. So students don't live in traditional dorms. Well, some students do. The inclusive higher education students at UCCS don't live in traditional dorms. If they choose to live on campus, they live in apartments where there are typically 4 students to an apartment. They have their own bedroom and bathroom, so they can get some, private study time and just alone time. But then they also have a common kitchen, living, and laundry room. So they do have roommates. They do have some socialization, people to hang out with, all that kind of stuff. Then Elevate at Arapahoe Community College offers services at both their locations in Littleton and Castle Rock, Colorado. Commuter Campus as a community college, so nobody lives on campus there. And more in line with the length of a community college, this is a 3-year option. Regis University, the Global Inclusive Program in Denver, does offer on-campus living. They're in your more traditional dorms, but they're in suite style dorms. So you have 2 dorms that are connected with a bathroom in the middle. So there is not quite that same, like when I was in college, I think there were 20 of us that shared a bathroom on my floor. So they're not like quite so rugged, but it is more traditional college living. They have both a 1-year option, but most students do either the 2-year or the 3-year option there. And then UNC, the Go On and Learn, or we call it GOAL program in Greeley, is also a 4-year, much more traditional length program. Students do also live in pretty rugged dorms there as well. And then just to kind of give a brief overview, all of these programs have earned a federal designation called CTP. Really what that means for you and for families is that students are eligible for federal financial aid. That's, it does mean more than that, but kind of for your practical purposes, that is what that means. I've already touched on this statewide certificate. It is a really meaningful outcome. But the other cool piece about that is because it's statewide, students can transfer from one inclusive higher education program to another. So let's say they start out at ACC and then they decide, I'm ready to live on campus and live away from my family. They can take all their classes and they can transfer to another inclusive higher education program. And again, that process is pretty normative. And then that last little bullet point there, people often ask about the admissions process. They don't do admission twice a year. They only start new cohorts in the falls. So in August, they will start a cohort, right? So either last week or this week, all of our programs started up again. And the application process will typically open in the previous December, January, February. So kind of late first semester, early second semester of the year before. And then we are so excited to welcome on board CSU, which just opened this week or last week, their new program called RAM Scholars. This is a really cool experiential learning and agriculturally focused program where students are learning a lot about horticulture and animal husbandry and all kinds of stuff. So if you have a student who is just like nature or animal focused, this is the program for them. It is a much more traditional four-year program. They don't yet have on-campus living. Like I said, this is their first year, so they're just trying to get the kind of program under their feet, but they will eventually, hopefully, have on-campus living. And then also starting this school year is Metro State University of Denver, MSU Denver. That's a commuter campus. Not a lot of places for students to live in downtown Denver, but it is a pretty traditional four-year program, and that's the Inclusive Higher Education Solutions program. And then next fall, we will be launching both Cultivate at Lamar Community College and Aspire Scholars at Pikes Peak State College. They just are in their pilot years right now, so they don't know a lot yet. They're still kind of in their plan year. We'll give specifics when we have them. And just kind of note, for all four of these schools, their CTP, that federal financial aid designation, is still in process. They will have it eventually, ideally before your students are ready to go. And then again, students will also walk out with that statewide comprehensive higher education certificate. So with that was a lot. I will get into kind of the more nitty-gritty skills pieces, but before we move on, I'll open it up to any questions about anything I have chatted about so far. All right, then I'm going to keep rolling, but feel free to interrupt me at any point. All right, so we're going to go through college prep skills, followed up really kind of shortly. Oh, there's a message in the chat. Sorry. Is it true we apply in January? It depends on the school. Some of the schools open up for their August 2025. Some will open up in November or December. Some will open up in January, February. They all kind of have their own timeline. But yes, you will start applying either at the end of this semester or beginning of next semester for August of 2025. So it's like a winter time-ish that those applications open. Good question. Anything else? All right, let's keep rolling. Okay, so as I was saying, we're going to start with skills, and then I'm going to quickly kind of roll into the implementation plan. A lot of those do kind of roll together. Kind of the main difference is the skills is going to be more of a list. What kinds of skills do students generally need? And then the plan of implementation is how do we start working on them now? As you'll kind of see, a lot of that does kind of bleed together in some ways, and you'll see that. So you'll hear a lot of repetition, but again, just kind of know that that is what is to come. So Corey, I see your note about timelines. I will get that to you in an email tomorrow. All right, so before we roll too far, I will just kind of generally leave this kind of note for anybody who's on the call. So just kind of a general reminder, as I've already mentioned, there is a lot more responsibility in college than there is in the PK-21 world. Students are going to have high standards. They are going to be academically challenged. That is not a bad thing. In fact, that's a really, really good thing. I don't know how many of you have seen that video that came out sometime early in the spring, where it's a woman with Down syndrome, and she's saying, you know, like, my teachers think that I can't study Shakespeare, so they don't teach me Shakespeare, so I don't know Shakespeare, right? And so she's giving all these kind of, you know, various scenarios where she doesn't do things because people assume that she can't. She goes, but what if you assume that I can study Shakespeare? And so you teach me Shakespeare, and so now I know Shakespeare, right? And kind of the whole point of this video is we should assume that students are competent, because they are competent. They will rise to the occasion. They will show us what they're capable of. So that's just kind of a general reminder, a general kind of overarching umbrella theme that you'll kind of hear me keep coming back to as we go through the second half of this webinar here. So in college, everything is student-driven. Students will have incredibly high expectations. And again, that's a really, really good thing. We will fade support over time in college. So the most support student will receive will be in their first semester as freshmen when they don't know how to get around campus. They'll have someone take them to class, right? That kind of thing. By the time they graduate, they're going to be a lot more independent. And so supports will fade over time. And I'll kind of even share with you later in this webinar how you can start to fade supports as well in preparation for that. And then the last kind of thing, it's never too early to start preparing. It's never too late to start preparing. So the fact that you're here is really, really great. So thanks for being here. All right, let's roll. So as I've mentioned, again, a lot, we want to really presume that students are competent. We want to give them as many normative pathways and as many normative opportunities as possible. With that, we want to make sure that students are making choices that are informed. So twice a year, we have a mentorship program where we have prospective college students get on Zoom and meet with some of our current college students. And almost every semester, we have students who are our mentees who say, college sounds really hard and I don't think that's for me and I'm good. But they learned about it, right? They were informed about it and they were able to make that choice. And likewise, we should be giving students all of the information about all of their future paths and kind of all of their everything, so they can make as much choice as possible with as much information guiding those choices as possible. We're going to talk a lot today about skills that transfer into college and how to start working on them now. And kind of the general reminder for that is it's going to seem overwhelming. I'm going to get through a lot. And every year I do this webinar and every year I'm told it's overwhelming. And so I'm just going to sort of now say, yes, it is overwhelming. It can be. I'm going to do my best to sort of make it as palatable as possible. But the main thing is, if you can walk out of this webinar with one piece of information, one piece, I want you to remember that high expectations lead to positive outcomes. So think college, that National Coordinating Committee did a study in 2015. And in that study, they reported teachers' expectations have a greater impact on a student becoming employed or going to college than will a student's skills or disabilities. So as we're going through this, as I'm going through skills, if you're thinking to myself, gosh, my student seems pretty far behind, they don't have a lot of these skills, I want you to keep this quote in mind. Your expectations have a greater impact on where they go than on what they can do. So I'm just going to kind of leave that there. Again, as I mentioned before, we're always told that this particular webinar leaves families overwhelmed. I'm going to talk about skills that students will need in all 4 of these domains. And what I want to empower you to do is just choose 1 or 2 goals per category that you can work on with your student across the next semester or across the next year. Not everything can or will happen at once for any student, whether they have an intellectual disability or not, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Break it down for yourself, maybe choose, as I'm talking, 1 or 2 things per category that you want to write down that you want to focus on. And for now, you can kind of put the rest on the back burner. So I'm giving you permission and I'm challenging you to do that. And then before we go on, I just want to share this quote. There's a student who recently graduated. He is mostly nonverbal. He usually communicates with a communication device or an iPad. And his mom said, the bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives changed. So this is from a mom who thought her student would never be able to hold a job, would never be able to live independently. He graduated college. He holds great employment in the hospitality industry. And again, he is limited in his verbal communication skills. So keep that in mind. I often hear from families, but not my student. But yeah, it could be your student too. And that's kind of powerful, I think, for people to hear that. All right, so we're going to roll into the skills that students will need for college. I'm going to start with academics. There's 2 slides for academics. There's only 1 for the remaining, but just kind of keep in mind college is an academic endeavor, right? So keep that in mind. All right, so for academics, it's really important that we are continuing to work on literacy skills with our students. If students enter the transitions time period, so after 12th grade, if they go into an 18 to 21 program, academics are not the focus of transitions programs, right? They're life skills, and that's what transitions programs are for. So a lot of times those academic skills or those literacy skills will kind of fall by the wayside. And I want to ask you to ask your students' teachers to keep academic skills in the IEP. It's important for students to focus on things like basic sentence structure or a whole paragraph structure if they're ready for that. It's so important in college to be able to understand big ideas. And so this is something that you can work on in kind of any setting, right? Maybe you and your kid are out walking the dog and you see your neighbor and you go, hey, how's Sally, right? And then as you walk away, you ask your kid, what did Bill say Sally is up to, right? So it doesn't have to be in an academic setting, but just working on figuring out what big ideas are. Or maybe you read a chapter of a book together and then you stop and, hey, what were the big ideas in that chapter? And then from there, you can kind of focus on note-taking, either handwriting or speech to text or typing, which are all things I'll get to in a few bullet points here. Email is something that college students live and die by. And really, if I'm being honest, most of us live and die by our emails. And email etiquette is really important. We hear from a lot of professors that first semester freshmen will kind of treat their emails like a text message, and that is not appropriate, right? Emails do require full sentences. They typically require an introduction, like, Professor Smith kind of thing, right? You don't typically do that in a text. So just kind of working on email etiquette, right? We don't send 17 emails in a row like we might send a text. You want to make sure you have all of your big ideas, send one big email at a time. And so kind of basic things like that. You can work on sending emails to family members or things like that, where it's really low stakes, but you're just kind of building the skills in more normative and natural ways. Audiobooks are huge. Research shows that the same part of your brain lights up when you're listening to an audiobook as when you're reading the book. And so don't discount that as a way to build literacy skills. That is really important. So many audiobooks can be downloaded for free from your local libraries. So if that's not something your family already does, I highly recommend it. It's also important for students to know their own learning needs. That includes their strengths, but that also includes their weaknesses. Again, in college, it's up to students to tell their professors what their accommodations and modifications will be. So they should know what those things are. They should know what they like. They should know what they don't like. They should know what they need more support in. They should tell their professor on day one, hey, I'm not the greatest writer. I might need more help with that kind of thing, right? So when I come to office hours, expect me to need help with writing. And I'm just kind of giving random examples, right? But it's important for students to be able to self-advocate, and to do that, they need the knowledge to be able to speak up for themselves. Technology know-how. We hear so much about students coming to college unprepared in terms of technology. And so if there's one thing that you really want to focus on, I highly recommend it being the way that technology kind of braids through the rest of all of these recommendations. So again, email access, checking your email every single day, responding to emails in a timely fashion, back to that email etiquette piece as well. Also in college, you're not going to find very many instructors or professors who accept paper anything. Almost everything is done online. So helping students navigate Microsoft Word or Google Docs, helping them work on submitting things through a learning management system. Most high schools already have those, right? Schoology, Canvas, Google Classroom, just to name a few. They will be using those things in college. So even if the interface is different, at least getting used to the process. And then helping them download assistive technology. Google has a really awesome plugin that's free for Google Chrome called Read and Write. And again, it's a free plugin that can turn any web page into a speech-to-text or text-to-speech option. And in the chat, we have a question. Email tips amazing. Yes, that's a really important one. And then the other piece of technology that is not on here that is so important. Almost everybody, almost every college professor now uses a digital discussion board. So that involves, you have to type your thoughts in the discussion board, right? Based on page 27 of the reading, I think XYZ. And so you post your thoughts. Then you have to go in and you have to read some of your classmates' thoughts and respond. I disagree with you because, right? That kind of thing. So that is something that just interacting in a technological space can be a challenge for students, because you're having a whole conversation, but you're not actually having a whole conversation. And you have that added kind of piece of, people may be used to doing that in a text, but now you have to be kind of formal with it. Maybe you have to cite your sources, right? And so even if it's modified, where instead of having to write 3 paragraphs of your thoughts, you're only writing 2 sentences, it can still be a challenge, right? So in classrooms, I highly recommend teachers start doing online discussion boards, even of like, get on the discussion board and tell us about your weekend kind of thing. There's no wrong place to start. Additionally, with academics, I encourage you to have your student explore their academic interests. There is a lot more choice in college, and so you want to prepare them to kind of know what sorts of choices they might want to make. Attendance and punctuality are so important. Obviously, it's important to show up to class on time, but the piece to this that sometimes people don't think about is turning in assignments on time, right? Going back to that discussion board example I just gave, what do you do if the discussion board closes at midnight? That's a really hard one for professors to give accommodations of extended time. Sometimes they can, but sometimes the board just closes, and no matter what the professor wants to do, they can't, right? And so sometimes punctuality has to do with turning in assignments. And so maybe you have 7 assignments due Tuesday, but what are we going to do on Sunday? Just kind of working on like one at a time kind of pieces of punctuality. Again, we really encourage students to participate inclusively, be in as many inclusive academic settings as well as social settings as possible. It's important for students to learn to take responsibility as well as ownership for high quality work. If we're going to set high expectations for our students, which we are now going to if we haven't already been doing that, it's important for students to sort of take the responsibility of, I can do my part to reach that bar, right? That's something that we can work on in academic settings. We can also work on that in social settings and all kinds of settings. So you'll see that piece of that ownership kind of come up again in a few slides as well. It's important for students to set their own goals and track their own goals. In an IEP context, this happens kind of without a student's knowledge sometimes, right? Where we're tracking the sentence structure growth that a student has, right? Well, maybe a student sets their own goal that they want to be able to write a complete sentence. So we're going to start by setting the goal, and then the student's going to track it on their own, right? So maybe first they're just writing complete sentences that have a subject and a verb. Okay, then they're working on, okay, now I can do that. Now I'm going to add capital letters to that. Now I'm going to add proper punctuation to that, right? So they're setting their own goals, they're tracking their own goals in a way that may relate to IEP goals or it may not, right? But just kind of getting practice in doing that can be really, really helpful. It's important for students to follow a schedule. In college, they've got to get themselves from class to internship to club to whatever, right? As well as accepting constructive criticism. And this can be really hard. But students are going to get feedback from professors that, hey, this assignment is not perfect. Or they're going to get feedback from bosses that, you know what, the way you interacted with that unhappy customer maybe should be done differently in the future. Here's how I would do it, right? If we're not used to hearing constructive criticism, even for me, sometimes when I hear constructive criticism, I'm like, wow, that kind of stings, right? But you got to be able to work through that kind of, feedback with persistence, with the growth mindset that, yeah, I can keep doing it and I can do it better next time. So that's the academic section. For social skills, and you'll see some of these kind of roll in together. So self-awareness and regulation. Some of that might be, I'm at work and I just got feedback that maybe I didn't do something to my best quality. And so maybe now I'm feeling really dysregulated and I'm feeling kind of off, right? I got to be able to know that. And I got to know how to manage that. And so even just working on like, how do you regulate at home when something doesn't go well? Or in a very basic classroom scenario where something doesn't go well, right? We got to work on schedule management. So are we getting to clubs on time? If we're saying to our friend, we're going to meet them at the dining hall at 12:30 for lunch, are we showing up at 12:30 or are we showing up at 2:30, right? So schedule management can be important for a thriving social life. Professional relationship awareness, I kind of just shared that a little bit, with receiving constructive criticism, but also sometimes we see some of our students sort of thinking that their bosses are their friends and sharing a little bit too much information. So some of it is just kind of about teaching boundaries in a more general sense. We also need students to be able to communicate about their own needs, right? So being able to say, hey, I am feeling really overwhelmed right now. I need to take a step back. Or in a work setting, can I just go to the break room and go to the bathroom and drink some water while I cool down kind of thing, right? So being able to share what those needs are and self-advocate in appropriate settings can go a long way. In college, we are going to have a lot of relationships to manage. We are going to have roommate relationships if we live on campus. A lot of students experience their first romantic relationships, new friendships, peer mentor relationships. So just basic conflict relationship management can be helpful for students who have siblings. This tends to be a different kind of beast than it is for students who don't have siblings. And that can go in either direction, but just kind of helping students, guiding them through that conflict management, however it happens. Sometimes as parents and teachers, we have a tendency to kind of step in and do that on behalf of students. And it's important to sort of walk them through and teaching them how to do that on their own in safe ways. It's important to help students learn how to collaborate and participate actively. They're going to be in so many group projects, in clubs, and all kinds of stuff. So again, inclusion matters. Start early. It's never too early to learn those skills. Adaptability is also really important, right? How often in college does a professor send an email at 8:30 canceling a 9 a.m. class, right? And so how are you going to handle that when your whole schedule suddenly may feel like my whole day is imploded because one thing is different, right? What are we going to do about it? Responsible risk taking. I do want to remind you that if your students are going to college, they're on a college campus. We've had students join fraternities and sororities and all kinds of, traditional college things that may require them to know what risks to take and what risks not to take. they are adults who have the freedom to take those risks, but we sort of want to help them figure out what is responsible, what's appropriate, what's maybe age appropriate as well. And a big piece of that has to do with social media. So we'll see students kind of post anything and everything on social media, use it as their diaries. One day your boss is going to look at that, your family maybe, right? So let's kind of think through some of these pieces. What do we really want on social media? And then that last bit is using natural supports. So what would anybody do in this circumstance if they needed help, right? Mom and dad, teacher, sibling, they're not always going to be there to help you. So what do you do if you're lost on campus? Well, when I was a freshman lost on campus, I just stopped and asked someone else who I was like, you look like you know where you're going. Where's this building, right? Or maybe I would have gone to the Welcome Center and I would have gone to the students who are paid to help me figure out where to go. Or I would have figured out where a map was on campus, right? So you can start to practice this in a variety of senses. The example that I like to use is at the grocery store, right? I feel like every few months I go to the grocery store and they've changed up the aisles and I'm used to the soda being in aisle 27, but now it's not, right? So what do? I ask the clerk at the King Supers near me, where is the soda, right? I don't ask my mom. My mom just can't help me with that, right? And so I try to, kind of use that example just to sort of give an example of how can we start practicing using natural supports in our everyday environments, and then how can that sort of be braided in to our college preparation. All right, so for career, you'll see a lot of these have kind of bled in from the other categories. So it's important to give students career awareness and exploration. They can't know what they want to do if they don't know what all their options are. Self-awareness is really helpful, right? I had a student say to me, I think I really want to be a paleontologist. And I said, I'm not saying you love working with dinosaur bones. And he goes, no, bones gross me out. Well, that's maybe not the most self-aware, right? So after we kind of talked about that, he realized, okay, I don't want to be a paleontologist. I want to do other things in the sciences, but not that, right? So self-awareness can be really helpful. What do students like? What do they not like? They think they want a job, but what does that job actually look like in the day-to-day? Does that interest them or would that bore them, right? We also want to work on time management. Part of that is kind of communication strategies. So saying things to your boss like, I know I was supposed to have this thing done by Tuesday. It's not going to get done by Tuesday, right? So kind of communicating needs like that as relates to time management, but as relates to, lots of other things as well. That kind of folds into problem solving. Well, I know both these things were due Tuesday, but I think this one has less priorities, so maybe let's make that Wednesday, all that kind of stuff, right? It's also important for students to have their own intrinsic motivation as well as initiative. So rather than waiting for a boss or a peer to say, hey, why don't you go do this task? It's, wow, I'm looking out and I'm seeing that this thing really needs to get done, so I'm just going to do it without being asked. And I want to do it. That's part of that motivation piece, right? I want to be a good employee, or I want to be a good teammate, or whatever that, kind of looks like for each individual. Self-advocacy. So I've given a few examples of that already. I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I would like to, take a break kind of thing. And part of that goes along with social emotional understanding. So we're going to have experiences where we talk to people who are not the happiest with us, or they're kind of shooting the messenger and we're the messenger, right? And what do we do? How do we not take that on? But kind of even a bigger piece to that is even your favorite job, even the best job in the world is stressful. So how can we identify those stress triggers? How do we handle them? How do we communicate that and the needs related to that? And a lot of these are skills that, right, like I'm still kind of working on a lot of these skills. A lot of these things never go away. So it's never too early to start preparing for them. And then kind of along with that, as I mentioned, are coping techniques. All right. And then the last list of skills I will go over are independence. So students will have to navigate campus, whether they live on campus or not. They're going to have to get themselves to class. They're going to have to figure out their own personal safety, what's kind of some general campus safety things. So I'm at the library, my laptop is on the desk in front of me. Am I just going to walk away and leave? No, I should probably take my laptop with me if I'm going to be gone for more than maybe a quick bathroom break kind of thing, right? And so a lot of those kind of just thinking through like what's to come in the future kind of skills and working on that with students in more broad senses. Community access can be really important, as well as travel training. I'll talk about that in a few slides as well. Using downtime. So again, there's a lot of downtime in college, a lot more than students are used to. How are we going to use that productively? Maybe I want to sit down and scroll through social media right now because I just need to check out. And for 20 minutes, that's okay. Do I really want to do that all day on a Saturday? No, I don't. Medication management. Some students have pretty robust medication routines. Some students will never get totally independent with those, and that's okay. There are supports to help with that kind of need from case management agencies and other community support agencies. But we can start, giving students a daily vitamin, and they manage that on their own. So it's low stakes, right? Start doing things that are important for students to kind of gain the skills, but the consequences of not doing those things are less severe, right? Than if you don't take your medicine that you need to, keep your heart beating every day. Self-care and cleanliness is really important. When mom isn't there to tell you to shower today or do your laundry, right? Who's telling you that? You are, right? Things like food safety. I just cooked chicken and I cut raw chicken with a knife. Well, am I going to use the same knife to cut my cooked chicken? No, I'm going to put it in the dishwasher and I'm going to get a new one, right? So kind of basic things can kind of fall into a lot of these categories. And so that's when it starts to feel overwhelming, break it down into the basics, the things that you interact with every single day. There are lots of agencies that will help you. You can absolutely use them. That's what they're there for. We can work on money management with students. So basic finances, like I'm going to give you $20 and I want you to make it last until Friday. How are you going to do that kind of thing? As well as home-based responsibilities, right? Chores. So we can start all that kind of stuff now. All right, before we go on to kind of building our plan, I'll break for questions. I have the chat open, so type it in or unmute. Resource recommendations for money management, always a challenge, and banks do not have a good solution for people with disabilities. Yeah, this is a really great question. And I don't want to give a one-size-fits-all recommendation because everybody is kind of different in what they can handle. So we've seen a few things work for a few families. They may or may not work for your family. One thing that has commonly worked are preloaded gift cards, where you can get the gift cards that like once the $50 is out, the $50 is out. But you can also get ones that you reload. And so you can kind of use that as like a debit card, but the spending limit is capped. And so that can kind of help students learn how to spend in more responsible ways, right? Where you say, okay, we're going to go to King Soopers together and I'm going to go do my shopping and you do your shopping and we'll see kind of what your total is at the end. And then, okay, well, you bought 3 bags of chips. We really need 3 bags of chips, right? So again, that's just sort of one example of how you can kind of do that in a lower risk kind of way. It also, I have noticed, is sort of a natural thing that students kind of learn if they have to help pay for their own college education. So we have a lot of students who do work on campus or off campus, and they use their funds to help support the family tuition bill. For a lot of students, that's kind of a harsh reality, whether they have a disability or not, but you got to start to learn money management that way. And so I don't want to say just wait and figure it out, but for some families that kind of is when that lesson sets in. We've also seen, and in addition to that, reloaded cash, we've seen like we're going to start doling out, or reloaded card, we're going to dole out a certain number of cash at a time, and when you're out, you're out. We've seen families sit down with their students and do the entire household budget, right? Some families don't want to do that because they don't want their family to know what their monthly or yearly income is, and that's up to you. Some families, that's part of life, right? And so we have seen families sit down with their students in front of an Excel spreadsheet and, okay, this is the amount that comes in, our Excel bill is this, our Denver water bill is this, et cetera, et cetera. What's left at the end of the month? How are we going to spend it? And so a variety of things have worked for a variety of families and students. I don't know your student that well, so I can't definitely say this thing will work. But there are certainly things that you can try, and I'm happy to meet more on a one-on-one way to sort of chat about that with you and your family. So long-winded answer. Yeah, so let's keep going. If there are any other questions, there will be another opportunity in a few slides here. All right, so again, I just talked about a lot of different skills that your student or students will need. Again, it can get overwhelming. I'm going to remind you that my challenge for you is just pick 1 or 2 per category, or if even that feels a lot, just pick 1 or 2, okay? A lot of these things I have already mentioned, so I'm going to kind of blaze through some of them, some I'll stop and explain in a little bit more detail. But here are just kind of some general techniques. We always want to instill a growth mindset in our student. Sure, you spent your $50 at King Soopers in the wrong way, but what are we going to do next time, right? There's always room for growth. There's always room to do better. We want to give students as much choice as possible in as many ways as possible, even the things that seem kind of silly, right? So it might start with like, what do you want to wear to school today? You decide, right? You pick your own outfit. And I'm intentionally giving kind of a silly example because you'll see that it will kind of make sense as we go through this slide. So you're going to want to fade supports over time, help students be as independent as possible. And we do that with prompting. And we start with prompts that are the least intrusive, and we move into prompts that are more intrusive. So we're going to go back to that, what do you want to wear to school today example. That's an open-ended question, right? What do you want to wear to school today? That students can kind of answer that however they want to, right? There's not necessarily a yes or a no answer to that. So they go upstairs, they put on a tank top, they come back down, and you look out the window and, oh my gosh, there's a blizzard outside right now. Okay, well, I'm not going to let my kid go to school in a tank top when there's a blizzard. So what are we going to do? So then we're going to move into prompting background information. Okay, so what happened the last time when there was a blizzard and you wore a tank top, right? And you kind of just help them come up with their own answers. And if that's still not working, then you can give a little bit more direct cues. And so this is going to be the most intrusive of our prompts, right? So, okay, well, let's just go outside and see how it feels, right? Or, you know, go get a sweatshirt, right? So this can kind of look a variety of different ways, but just kind of remembering that we do want to help students be as independent as possible, fade our supports in as many ways as we can, even in those silly kind of domains, right? And then sort of a last reminder in this is there is a dignity in being able to take risks. There's a dignity in being allowed to fail and learning from our failures. So as parents, as teachers, it can become kind of second nature to step in for students and just sort of stop their choices or change their choices immediately because we don't want to see them fail. And I want to give you the permission to allow the students around you to fail. There's a dignity in that. And that goes back to that growth mindset, right? You can't do better in the future if you don't know what you did wrong in the first place. All right, so how we can instill a lot of these skills I've gone over at home. So Corey, this is a link to our website that has our financial resources. You can start even exploring that and looking into what does college cost, and even start there of like, okay, as a family, we need to come up with $20,000 for the semester. I'm pulling out a number, right? Where is that money going to come from? So you can even start there. That is one resource. We can identify calendar apps. Almost everything in college is digital now. So calendar apps where they can record their own appointments, their own alarms, have them do as much as possible with the resources they have available to them. I already mentioned you can start taking vitamins if your student has a medication routine. Staple meals are really important. PB&J, quesadillas, pasta, pretty easy meals can go a long way. And yet a lot of students aren't taught how to make those. So even like staple meals, please help your students learn how to do 1 or 2 or 3 kind of basic meals, as I said. Students can pack their own backpacks or lunch boxes. They can follow a cleaning routine, right? Chores, how do you clean the bathtub, that kind of thing. That can go a long way. All right, at school, students should be leading their own IEP meetings. If your student isn't even in their own IEP meeting, that should change. Because again, in college, no conversation will happen without them. They will be informed of every conversation and they will be guiding most of those conversations. So they need to start practicing what that looks like. As much as possible, advocate for inclusion. I've said that before, that is a research-based practice. Please, please, please get your child, your student included in as many domains of life as possible. We want to have high expectations, but also make sure that the other adults that your student interacts with have those same high expectations. Paraprofessionals, teachers, coaches, kind of anybody, right? Our expectations should be as high as the sky. If you're going to email a teacher, even if it's like, hey, just letting you know that Johnny is a dentist appointment at 2 p.m., CC the student in there, right? That helps them. If they check their email every day, but they don't get emails, well, then they're going to stop checking their email, right? So it helps them get emails. It also is a good way for them to then respond appropriately and practice a lot of that email technique and etiquette. It's important for the student to meet with teachers, paraprofessionals, all that kind of stuff at the start of the year to talk about their accommodations and modifications, but also throughout the year. Continue that self-advocacy process. It's important for students to be as interested in what they're doing as possible. And then time for personal organization and maintenance. It's really easy to say to students, you should be doing these things. That's a lot of executive functioning for a lot of people. So provide them the time to get that stuff to happen. All right, and then I'm looking at the time. It's 6 o'clock. If you need to hop off, go for it. I only have about 5 more minutes, so if you can hang with me, do, but I'm gonna keep rolling. All right, so in the community, some things that you can help students do are volunteer in places where they have interest. You can also coordinate job shadowings or internships. These do a couple things. They expose students to, job pathways that are out there. They also help students get involved in the community in inclusive ways, which again, that's really important. You can help students identifying, finding, and then registering if they're ready for different activities or events that interest them. So maybe they really want to go to a Rockies game. So you help them find the Rockies schedule, and then who are they playing? Okay, what game do we want to go to? Okay, well, how do we buy the tickets, right? And then maybe you're going to help them access the travel training. So, all right, let's take the light rail down to the Rockies game. How do we figure out what line is closest to our house and where do we get off? How do we buy our tickets, right? So you can start incorporating a lot of these things into more kind of everyday parts of your life. Again, natural supports. So as much as possible, have your student practice asking their peers or just other kind of people in the world that are not teachers, parents, siblings, that kind of stuff. And then if you have not, please connect with your local case management agencies. These are organizations that are specifically geographically kind of there to help you and your family navigate all the resources in the community that help your student wherever they are. All right, and then just kind of some last reminders. I promise you're not alone. I know this was overwhelming, but it's okay to take it one step at a time. And if you are not already, there's a lot of community agencies you can collaborate with. The Village is really big in the disability world. So you can work with DVR and SWAP for employment needs, ARC chapters for a lot of different advocacy needs, again, case management agencies, Peak Parent Center, et cetera, they just kind of keep going. All right, and then resources. I'm not going to go through these. You can go through these in your own time when I send out the slides. But just know that all of these photos are clickables. If you click them, the actual PDF will download directly to your device. So we've got how to prepare for college, some research-based and evidence-based practices for preparing students, some age-based skill development, and then a few checklists in kind of these various domains. With that, a lot more links to kind of help get you hooked up in LinkedIn. I really want to call it our mentorship program. It's my favorite aspect of my job. For 6 weeks, I get to meet with current college students on Zoom, as well as prospective college students, and just kind of hear their conversations and hear the prospective students' questions and the current students' experiences, and just kind of learn what it's like to be a college student with an intellectual disability. And in a lot of ways, it's really similar to my own college experience, and in a lot of ways, it's not, right? And so they get to sort of be the experts in their own experience. So I highly recommend students sign up for that. Applications are open until September 13th. It's all free, it's all on Zoom, pretty low stakes. And then just a few more national resources. If you want to help make sure that your student is prepared in their IEP, lots of resources there. And now I'm done. Time for questions.